What's up, everyone? It's Matt Martin with the Grass Factor. Today, going to do a video. I promised I'd do. We are going to jump into all about warm season turf grasses and how to build a program to maximize their performance. All right, y'all. So today we're going to be talking about warm season turf grasses, and basically they could be considered a turf grass that's going to go through in a typical setting. Hawaii is going to be different, Florida is going to be different, but in periods, in areas where it could face a winter dormant cycle as well as a spring green up. So for those of you that are in transition areas, you see some halvesies yards where during the winter time the yard goes completely dormant, it's browned out. Anything you see green growing in it typically is non-desirable. That is going to be a strong sign that you're dealing with warm season turf grasses. The most popular warm season turf grasses are going to be Bermuda, zoysia grass, centipede, and St. Augustine. Outside of that, you may see some Bahia grass. There's going to be some buffalo grass, however, not as common as these particular four turf types here. So these are going to be the four that I talk about. When classifying these warm season turf grasses, it's important to understand how they work, how they grow, how they reproduce, how they mature, and that can kind of help you when you're building your program for their performance. So basically, the way they're going to quote-unquote self-repair, warm season turf grasses have the ability to spread much like a Kentucky bluegrass would, is that you have either stolons or you have rhizomes. Stolons are going to be those surface runners. If you've ever watched Bermuda grass, the way it actually spreads above surface is you see a runner begin to form, it stretches out, it tacks down, and then another shoot, another runner comes off of that, and they go every which direction possible, and that's how you get your coverage. Conversely, when you're dealing with like zoysia grass, you're going to actually have reproduction take place through rhizomes. This would be more similar to Kentucky bluegrass. So instead of having an above surface runner form from the plant, you actually have it form from the crown of the plant, but it moves, it sends the shoot off underground to begin to form the next viable plant. So two little differences there, but as you'll see as we develop a program, how it actually grows is going to be important. One thing to note, Bermuda grass is going to grow by above ground runners as well as rhizomes. So you got stolons and rhizomes for Bermuda grass. Again, that's going to be more useful later on. One thing to kind of note, this is just kind of charting the bell curve of the growing season of warm season versus cool season grasses. The cool season grass, you're going to begin and get that real surge of growth starting in April. And then that'll continue into May, into June, and then as you begin to hit peak heat of the summertime, you're going to see a sharp decline in performance from the turf and possibly growth. You may even see it go dormant. And then as it begins to cool in fall, you get another quote-unquote growing season towards the second half of the year. Versus with a warm season grass type, again, outside of Hawaii and Florida, typically what you see is you have a dormant period, then a green up period, and then it begins to curtail as the number of hours of daylight in a day decrease. So after August, you're going to get a continual decline in performance from your turf grass. And it's not so much going to be your ambient air temperature, it's not going to be your soil temperature, because temperatures at that time are still going to be satisfactory for the performance of a warm season grass. However, from July through August 15th, we're going to lose an hour of sunlight a day. And so what is going to happen is that's going to trigger a hormonal response from the plant, that lack of light, and tell it to begin storing those carbohydrates, those simple sugars in the roots and stolons to gear up for wintertime when it's going to go dormant. And that's what will help it come out of dormancy the next year. So anyway, start there. now let's move on to the next little topic here of understanding. All right, so we talked about the basic agronomic ideas of warm season turf grasses. So now let's dive a little deeper into the growth pattern, not of the actual warm season grass itself, but a bit of a weed cycle in general. Having a better understanding of the weed cycle in relation to months and seasons can help you plan and time your applications to make sure you're getting adequate control of the weeds that you're going to be facing. So what I've done is I have charted out basically all the months of the year, January through December. And let's assume that we're starting a brand new yard the 1st of January. This is a Bermuda yard, and we want to set it up for absolute success. Okay, so based on it being January 1st, this Bermuda yard has never had a treatment before. What are we going to be dealing with? First thing is, as far as what's visible, this top area right here is what's going to be visible. Through January through May, all that we're really going to see in this yard would be winter weeds. Typically what's growing in this time frame is what's germinating are going to be cool season weed varieties. Most of the time it's going to be annuals, but you could be dealing with some perennials too. So with it being the 1st of January, what we have visible is going to be winter weeds. What we need to be doing is running a post-emergent weed control. That's going to be in this period. It doesn't matter if you're tank spraying it, you're blanket spraying it, you're spot spraying it, but keep that in mind. We're going to need to be spraying post-emergent weed controls designed to control winter weeds. At that point, it's going to be determining, is it mostly broadleaf? Is it going to be grassy? What exactly is it going to be? Okay, the other thing that we have looming over us is that in this time period is when summer weeds are beginning to germinate. So to set us up as far as the best possible defense against potential summer weed issues, we also need to be considering a pre-emergent. Because in this same time that the weeds we're actually seeing are going to be last year's germination, we need to make sure that we're putting down a pre-emergent that's going to prevent next season's weeds. So, when I talk about summer weed germination in this time period here, I'm talking about crabgrass, goosegrass, sedges, foxtail, medic, spurge. There's a whole list of different weeds you can name, barnyard grass. So, this is the time that we need to be preparing so that way when we enter this period that the lawns are relatively clean. Okay, so if you notice, we have winter weed germination here. We have visibility here. We have summer weed germination here, and we have summer weed visibility here. So, it takes an entire season, a seasonal shift, sometimes 2 seasonal shifts before you begin to see the fruits of your labor. I hear, it's something I hear all the time is, you put out a pre-emergent in February and then you get a call in May and you say, I got a yard full of crabgrass. No, you don't. Unless you're in Florida, no, you don't. And the reason being is that you're only beginning to get germination somewhere in this period. And in fact, you're probably not going to get crabgrass germination until right around here. And so it's going to take at least a month. If you think about fescue coming into maturity, you'll be able to see it after a couple of weeks, but it's still going to be in a relatively small, tiller. And then it's not until it's been established for a month or even longer does it actually begin to stick up and grow and look like a viable plant. It'll be the same thing. So if you're getting germination in here, then you're not going to be seeing, viable crabgrass plants until June. So just one thing to keep in mind there. Conversely, on the flip side of this, again, dealing with warm season grass, we have to face the winter weeds. And the big one at hand is going to be Poa annua. Poa annua is also known as annual bluegrass, and it's the bane of everyone's existence that manages warm season turf. And the reason being is that if you have warm season turf and it goes dormant during the winter time, Poa annua is green and it sticks out unbelievably bad amongst a dormant brown lawn. So Again, when you're talking about this winter weed germination, you have to be planning to run your pre-emergent in this window. And most pre-emergents will tell you on the label when you need to be applying it by, whether that's soil temperature wise or time of year. Typically that's going to be in that mid-August through September time frame to get that first pre-emergent down to prevent things like POA. The other weeds that are going to be germinating in this time frame are going to be bittercress, which is a big one, always having to deal with in spring. Henbit, always have to deal with henbit in spring. You know, onions and garlic, they're perennial, but that's just when you begin to see them emerge. They don't really become an issue until spring, is when they're really active, and I would say almost violently growing. Same with chickweed. In spring, it seems like it goes everywhere, just bananas, clover. It goes everywhere in the springtime. So, note that actually takes place here, but you're not really seeing the fruits of your labor until here. A lot of times, another thing I run into is I get from people that, let's see, oh, I don't need this treatment at the end of the growing season because the grass is about to go dormant anyway, and it's clean right now. I really don't have any weeds. Well, yeah, because you've kind of hit this period here where you're a little bit late in your summer weed visibility. Say you did a good job with your post-emergent weed controls right here. The lawns are clean through here. This is when these winter weeds germinate, but they're not going to be visible till the next year. So the problem is that if you don't put down a pre-emergent here, yeah, lawn may look fine until December, even into January, maybe even in February, and then March, April, and May, all of a sudden they're angry at you because what happened is that the weeds actually germinated in this time frame. They never made it above the turf grass canopy until here. So even though you put down pre-emergent, say you go out mid-January, you put down a pre-emergent, and still February, March, April, May comes along, and you've still got weeds everywhere, and you're like, how is this possible? When I was last out here, I put down a pre-emergent, I caught it before all this came up. Well, no, you didn't. The problem is that it actually came up here. It was just tiny, 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 never made it to the canopy of the dormant grass, and so you never knew it was there, but it already was there, and now it's just here. So once it's already germinated, you're really out of luck running a pre-emergent. So that's why it's so important to catch it before it germinates, whether you're doing that in the winter, you're doing that late summer to control your winter weeds, or you're doing that early pre-spring, late winter, to prevent your summer weeds. Okay, now let's kind of dive into the seasonality and the different types of products we should be considering applying to Bermuda grass. And so basically, well, any warm season grass. So I broke it up into the time of year, the present conditions, the upcoming conditions we could be facing, and treatment options. For those of you that don't know, have never seen one of my program videos before, one thing I like to do whenever I'm at a lawn is I want to make sure whatever I'm doing on the lawn that day not just takes care of the issue at hand, but it's going to make my job, my life easier the next time I return to the property. So if I can do something at this first application that will make my next application easier, it saves money in the long run, saves time in the long run, and saves a lot of potential bad feelings that could exist between client and service provider. So anyway, that's why I'll always take this into consideration. It's good to kind of put together a flow chart of the different things that take place as you transition through the year, because some things you may forget. For instance, in this time period right in here, when I was dealing with primarily Bermuda grass in warm season markets, in this March and April to in the May time frame, I always ran into an issue with a type of weed called American burnweed. And it always led to a ton of callbacks because you go, you treat the yard, a couple weeks later, you're back because, the lawn has exploded with American burnweed. And, in terms of being preventative about it, there isn't a whole lot to do. But if you time a blanket application of post-emergent weed control in that time frame, chances are you can catch it before it has the chance to reach maturity. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. So anyway, I'll start taking you through this. Obviously, January, February time frame, turf grass is going to be dormant, but what is coming up? We probably, at the current time, we have visible weeds. Those are going to be your visible winter weeds. It could be POA, the others we talked about, clover, hairy bittercress is going to be big then. Henbit is always going to be unsightly at this time. And then the other big thing to keep in mind is that we are about to be hitting that germination period for our summer weeds. So it's best as a treatment option in this time frame to go ahead, take care of your visible weeds if you can, if you've got the temperatures, take care of those, and also get down your pre-emergent to prevent those summer weeds. I'll get more into these particular products here, but just to kind of create an outline, January, February time frame, you need to apply post because you're going to be seeing weeds. You're going to need to apply a pre-emergent. It may seem early, but it's not early. And studies show that most pre-emergents we're out there using actually work better the earlier we get them down. So get down your pre-emergent, get down post-emergent. In March and April time frame, this is where we kind of go from that. We are in a full-blown transition at this point. One thing you have to keep in mind when you're in transition, what do most labels tell you about Bermuda grass or any warm season turf grass that's in transition? Be careful with post-emergent weed controls. That is when the turf grass is going to be most sensitive and you can do the most damage. So keep that in mind in this time frame. You are going to be in full-blown transition. That being said, this is when you tend to begin to run into disease issues with some of your more sensitive warm season turf grasses like zoysia and centipede and St. Augustine. So be prepared to begin being affected by potentially, your rhizoc species, your rhizoc salini, which would be your brown patch, and also dollar spot. So in terms of what you're applying today to help with your upcoming transition, or even if you're in the middle of transition to help you aid getting into that full-blown growing season, you may need to run a post-emergent. Like I said, I would have to at this time frame because I was dealing with the American burnweed, fireweed. And so basically what I would do was slightly drop my rate of 2,4-D or 3-way and up my rate of urea and use a urea ammonium sulfate kind of combination to act as a spreader sticker for it. Now, and last time I worked in a predominantly warm season market, I ran liquid a lot. So that was how I did that. If I were doing that today, I would probably use a good high quality surfactant and drop my 3-way rate a little bit. Instead of running a full 1.5 ounce, I would probably drop that to a 1.2 ounce because we're in full-blown transition. Okay, that being said, if it looks like you're past your frost point, or you're getting some significant green up, maybe it's time to start throwing the fertilizer to it. Okay, now when planting your fertilizer, I'll have a whole separate video on planting fert, but things to keep in mind. Bermuda grass, it doesn't require a ton of P, but if you are deficient and you need to get it down, now would be a good time to get it down because it's going to take a long time for it to move from the soil surface to the root zone of the plant. So by getting it down early, that may allow it to reach the root system by the time the plant really needs it to get going. So keep that in mind when you're doing your early fertilization here. You may want to be focusing on the secondary macronutrients, your P and your K, getting that down. And also with the emphasis on the K here, if in the event you're dealing with, you have a history of brown patch or dollar spot, you may want to up your K rate in this time frame to assist you with the disease and disease recovery. So just keep that in mind. Also, you need to make sure you have your second round of pre-emergent down by then if you're doing a split application. Okay, so moving into May and June, we are in the full-blown green growing season. And the current conditions, you may be dealing with a little brown patch, you may be dealing with a little dollar spot. But what may be upcoming is sedges, buttonweed, perennials. In this May, June time frame, really I begin to see sedges, at least here, the late part of April. Same with buttonweed, but typically, it's going to be somewhere in that April into May time frame that you begin to see those. Get a good jump start on them. If you're going about sedges with a product like the Smiths, keep in mind how that mode of action works on your sedges. If you're using a sulfonyl urea like Monument, pay attention to how Monument works specifically with sedge. But buttonweed, get it out of the way early, because the problem is if you let it come in and establish, it takes up a large area, and then when you do kill it out, it's going to leave a pretty significant bare area. It will fill in and recover. That's the beauty of warm season grasses, but it becomes nasty, and then when it goes away, it's nasty, and then it's got to grow in, so catch it early. So in terms of what you're going to be doing, the conditions you're dealing with, you've got, vigorously wanting to grow warm season grass. If you're dealing with Bermuda and zoysia, even St. Augustine to a degree, you got to get your fert down. Do you want to run high end? You may want to back your N rate down for zoysia, centipede, St. Augustine. Your K levels, where do you want your K levels to be? What's naturally in your soil? How much do you need to supplement to maintain your K levels? In terms of turf grasses like your centipede and your St. Augustines, you may want to run a 2-to-1 ratio of your N to K. If you're dealing with Bermuda grass, that may be you may want to run like a 7-to-1 ratio of your N to K. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to be running a high end, you may want to supplement with K to get more efficiency out of your N. Also, at this time, you may want to consider adding micronutrients. Micronutrients, again, are going to increase the efficiency of your macronutrients. So, would it be a good time to supplement with that? Of course, keep that in mind. If you do micros, that would be a good time to begin to get them down. Growth regulators, as you begin to get that surge growth transitioning from May into June, and assuming you're getting plenty of rain, and you're coming out and you're running super high rates of nitrogen, a decent rate of K and micros, you're going to get an incredible surge growth. So for those of you that like to run growth regulators, this would be a good time to start your growth regulator program. All right. Now moving into July and August, we're in the second half of the summer. Kind of a mental note that I make when dealing with warm season grass is that I have until the 4th of July to get the yard where I want it as far as coverage and everything else. I have till the 4th of July. After the 4th of July, it's on the downward decline. So I have to make people happy by the 4th of July. If I don't, I lost that season. So July and August, we're still green, we're still actively growing. However, the perennial weeds and the winter annuals summer annuals are really evident. So this is when Dallas grass is in full force. You cut a yard that has Dallas grass, 2 days later, you got seed heads that are 8 inches above the grass line. That happens in July and August. Same with crabgrass. You mow a yard, you didn't see the crabgrass, 2-3 days later, you see the seed head sticking up, you got crabgrass. Same with sedges. They're most vigorously growing right here in this time frame. So, in terms of what to do about that, obviously, you need to treat those with post as you normally would. One thing you need to keep in mind for what's upcoming is that you are on the downward decline in terms of daylight hours, the number of hours of daylight per day. That means this is your one last hoorah on this yard to get it looking the way it needs to look. So keep that lingering in the back of your mind. Also, that as it begins to cool off and your daylight hours decrease, you're going to begin your second season of Rhizoctonia solani potential breakout in your sensitive turfgrass species, your zoysias, your centipede, your St. Augustines. So this may be a time frame. If you do preventative disease controls, you may want to start then. And also in terms of how that influences your fertility program, you may want to up your K rates again leading into your second brown patch season. So in terms of fert, if you're dealing with Bermuda grass, can you get away with high end? That's going to depend on your area. You may be able to dial it back for the second part of the growing season. Depending on it may be a newer customer, or you've got really an aggressive irrigator that has that property. It may behoove you to go ahead and pound it again with high-end fertilizer. So I'm saying like a 3404, something like that, something high and in. Also, at this time frame, if you want to back your N rates down, the other thing you can do is up your micronutrient rates, and that too will also improve color. So just keep that in mind. If you're looking for just a color response without the surge growth, you may want to supplement with a higher rate of micronutrients versus slamming it with a high rate of nitrogen. Also, if you're doing your growth regulators, continue your growth regulator program. Don't let it go over 30 days, or you're going to run into the surge growth issue again. Okay, so September into October, now we're beginning to lose color. We're losing daylight hours significantly. The growth has begun to retard pretty significantly. Your sensitive turf grasses are showing signs of brown patch. The September-October time frame was always the time of year in St. Augustine where I'd get the most beautiful looking brown patch you have ever seen. The other thing to keep in mind, what's upcoming right now is POA germination. You are knee-deep thick in the middle of POA germination. So what does that mean? As we discussed earlier, to prevent the POA, we got to get down another round of pre-emergent. So, pre-emergent, because the grass is still there, in terms of fertilizer, do we need to be hammering it with nitrogen? Probably not. But because it is going into the winter mode, it may be a time to shift your fert away from nitrogen and supplement with micros and K being potassium. And that way you're just setting yourself up for a more efficient carbohydrate storage cycle leading into winter. And then as we move into November and December, we get our frost, lawns go dormant, they get the tiger striping effect that looks really cool. You get 4 or 5 phone calls asking what you did to the yard. You explain, oh, that's the frost, it just causes that marbling effect and it's all good. Everybody's happy. So what do we do when we're on the property at this time? We're probably going to be beginning to deal with the winter weeds. So we'll begin to see things like hairy bittercress starting to come up. We'll start to see some onions here and there. We may even see a little POA around the edges. So it's good to go ahead and treat that, get that out of the way so you're not dealing with it over the full course of winter. Also, it's a good time as far as setting yourself up for your next treatment on the yard. Set yourself up for the entire next year. Pull a soil test. Check your pH. Do you need to do any pH amending? Go ahead and, do your lime application this round. Or, that way you've got lime. You can talk to the customer. Maybe you can put it in up here in January. So there's a lot that can go on. Some people ask me, well, what do I do during the wintertime on my yards? There's always something that can be done. And it may not be evident that it's going to create a benefit in the short term, but in the big picture, in the long term, what goes on here, pulling a soil test, checking your pH, doing a corrective pH application, with a calcitic lime or a dolomitic lime, you're setting yourself up for an awesome next year. So while it may not have a big visual impact right then, but what it's actually providing you next year would be invaluable. So that's the basics of the principle of the program. Now let's kind of break it down into products and the times of year that we would be using them, and the big issue that exists with warm season turf grasses. I take that back. The big issue that exists amongst all turfgrass managers, and that's the lack of availability of different modes of actions in herbicide resistance management programs. All right, let's talk about our pre-emergent options on warm season grasses. This is not everything, but this is probably the most popular used products in terms of pre-emergence. We've got simazine and atrazine. I kind of lump them both together because they're so structurally similar chemically, and they're both photosynthesis inhibitors. They're good pre-emergents. They were good pre-emergents, but the problem is that they have become, weeds have become so resistant to them, they don't really act as pre-emergents anymore. I would consider both simazine and atrazine post-emergent herbicides at this point. So if you're planning on using simazine as a pre-emergent, I would not use simazine alone. Simazine will give you post-emergent activity better than it will pre-emergent activity. Same goes with atrazine. For those of you with Centipede, St. Augustine, that use a lot of atrazine. It's a restricted use product, which automatically is going to turn some people away from the product. There's not a lot of options for Centipede and St. Augustine, so I understand why it continues to get used, but it tends to act better as a post-emergent herbicide than it does a pre-emergent herbicide. So one thing to keep in mind there, the Bermuda, zoysia, guys, these are options, but they're not great options. However, if you're tank mixing this to get early post control on weeds, that may be a viable option. As a standalone pre-emergent, probably not. Prodiamine, pendimethalin, dithiopyr, I believe surfland, they're all DNA herbicides. They're group 3 pre-emergent herbicides. The problem is that if you're trying to manage herbicide resistance, weeds that have become resistant to pre-emergent herbicides, these are all in the same class. So it doesn't matter if you rotate 1 year from prodiamine to dithiopyr dimension, or dimension to aquacap, or aquacap to whatever. You can trade these up, use one then the other, however you want to do it. It doesn't matter because the weeds don't know the difference. The same thing happens. And in fact, interestingly, even with Spectacle, it's a different class, but they all do the exact same thing to weeds. And what they do is they prevent the rooting of weeds. They inhibit root development through different processes during root development. So, this will play a part in cell division, and this Spectacle and Dazaflam plays a part in the production of cellulose, and that's how it actually prunes roots. So, keep that in mind. I get a lot of questions about, well, I've used prodiamine for the last 3 years, so I think I'm going to use Dimension. Doesn't matter. The weed isn't going to know the difference. If you've got a weed that's resistant to prodiamine, that means it's also resistant to Dimension. So if you look here, you notice, I've got 6 different pre-emergents listed here. I've got, 3 modes of action. This is pretty much eliminated because things have become so resistant to it that you only have 2 options left to use as pre-emergents. And the problem is that now so many weeds have become resistant to these pre-emergents that you're really only left with Spectacle. The problem with Spectacle is that it's such a severe root pruner is that you can't use it on, I would never put this on a stoloniferous turfgrass. So remember we talked about those turf grasses that produce stolons that run across the surface. Then from the surface they have to tack those roots down. The problem is that Spectacle is such a strong root pruner that it's going to be harder on stoloniferous turf grasses. The beautiful thing about zoysia and Bermuda grass is that they both have rhizomes, so you're not going to get as strong of a stunting effect from Spectacle on those 2 turf grasses. The other thing to keep in mind is that Spectacle tends to have the biggest root pruning effect on sandy soils. So if you run into an issue where you have clay sand or you have a sandy loam, Spectacle is going to be harder on your turf grasses on those soil types than it would be if you had a true clay soil. So the problem is now, we just don't have a lot of options in terms of pre-emergence. What we do have is a couple of decent post-emergents that are quickly becoming resistant to that as a post-emergent. We've got basically 1 group of pre-emergents that all act the exact same, and then we've got 1 that's the wild card that could be considered risky to use. Really, that's it. Even if you talk about surfland is another DNA group 3. So, we just don't have a lot of options. So, The other ones that could be included that are an option would be like isoxaben. Gallery is labeled, I believe, for residential use. The problem is that crabgrass is not on the label. So is it a good option? It's got a long half-life. You may be looking at 150 days, or I think that's max half-life is 150 days. So, I mean, yeah, you get an extended period of control out of it, but the problem you run into is that it's not going to control all the weeds you need it to control. So, as far as for pre-emergence, you know, get something down. Something is better than nothing. And when I say it's resistant, if you go out and you treat a yard with prodiamine, you're not, even if you have resistant POA varieties in that property, it's still going to behoove you to get that pre-emergent down. So what universities are telling us to do now in terms of crabgrass prevention and POA prevention is 1 year on, 1 year off, and just have a strict post-emergent program to, you know, hopefully eliminate all your weeds that you have because you did not apply the pre-emergent. The problem is that timing, you have to get all that sprayed before it goes to seed, or you're redepositing the seed bank. The other issue you run into is that, you know, when you're trying to go after weeds like crabgrass and Poa annua post-emergently, the only options as far as herbicides on the market are all you've really only got like 2 classes of different post-emergent herbicides that you can go after those weeds with. And so you're not really doing anything in terms of herbicide resistance there, going after it post-emergently. And also, it's expensive. It's incredibly expensive. You know, 5 grams of Monument that is only going to be enough to treat, you know, 2.5 acres is just an incredibly high dollar product. So, I don't know. I don't know what to do about it. There's no real good answer. For the time being, what I just plan on doing is continuing to use, you know, prodiamine, and I don't have enough warm season turf to justify introducing Spectacle. If I can get fescue yards thick enough, I may take a few seasons where I hold off on, you know, prodiamine in the spring, but it's only going to be on select properties. So, I don't know, you know, this is just something to think about for the future. I don't think it's really anything to get up in arms about now. But, you know, in terms of all these new products they keep putting out, there's very little new chemistry going into it. And it's really frustrating to hear more and more about herbicide resistance and hear more and more from university research talking about how much of a giant issue that this is going to become. And then the products that keep getting pushed out on us are basically just relabeled, reformulated, same chemistry that's already out there. You know, when they mix 2,4-D and quinclorac, you know, dry, and put it together in a blend and stick a pretty name on it and then resell it to us at a premium, it's just frustrating. And so anyway, again, just keep in mind pre-emergence, you know, we got to use them. Obviously, just know that if you're seriously concerned about herbicide resistance, we don't really have a whole lot of options. All right, so when we talk about post-emergent herbicides that we use in warm season grass, you know, we'll break them up into broadleaves and grassy. You know, carfentrazone, sulfentrazone, dismiss, quicksilver. Typically, they're used as additives when controlling broadleaf weeds, so you would add that to 2,4-D. Same with metsulfuron. MCPA would be the active in a product like Tri-Power. Metsulfuron, when added with 2,4-D, you may get a little more cold weather activity out of it. Triclopyr, if you're dealing with dormant Bermuda grass, or if you're going after weeds in like zoysia grass, you may use triclopyr. If it's warm outside, you may use Monument or Celsius to go after broadleaf weeds. Here's what's funny is let's look at what we have available to control grassy weeds in warm season turf types. We've got some of the standards like Image, Old One, Dismiss, Sulfentrazone, but we've got Celsius, Revolver, Tribute, Sedgehammer, Monument, Katana, Certainty, MSM. Here's what's funny. Look at this chemical name, iodosulfuron, forum sulfuron. Tribute is a mix of iodosulfuron, forum sulfuron, and halosulfuron. Monument, trifloxysulfuron, Katana, I can't remember, rimsulfuron something, it's another sulfonylurea, Certainty, sulfosulfuron, MSM, metsulfuron. So in terms of controlling grassy weeds, we've got one herbicide class to be able to do that, and they're all sulfonylureas. So not a lot of options here. I mean, you do have a lot of options. The problem you run into is that every one of these are incredibly expensive, with the exception of MSM. MSM is relatively cheap. So, you know, when you're talking about going after Post on that big breakdown, the program outline, you know, these are going to be the products you're looking to consider running based on the time of year and whether you're going after broadleaf weeds or grassy weeds for that particular time of year. All right, let's talk a little bit about nutrient usage. In particular, these studies are going to be based off of Bermuda grass. As you can see, in a nitrogen usage chart and a potassium usage chart, they have almost an identical bell curve to the usage of those particular nutrients by Bermuda grass. A couple things to note. In particular, hybrid Bermuda grasses. I'm citing the study by Snider and Scissor that was done in 2000. Potassium corresponded with overall coverage and density, meaning if you supplemented with potassium, you had better coverage and turf density. What is crazy about it, though, is that all K rates produced equal turf. And they did tests from 1 pound per 1,000 square feet per season up to 4 pounds per 1,000 square feet per season. They all produced the exact same turf. So what is important is that if you're in K deficient soils, make sure your K is available, whether you apply it, your delivery method is via carbon or humic acid, or you have correct pH. You know, pH can oftentimes limit the uptake of certain nutrients. So keep that in mind. But as long as you're supplementing with some K, you're going to have overall better density. What's not as important is the rate of K. Same with phosphorus. Up to 1 pound per 1,000 square feet per year in a phosphorus deficient soil produced the highest rated turf grass. What's interesting is that if you over applied greater than 1 pound of P per 1,000 square feet per season, the Bermuda grass declined. That's over 1 pound of P per season. Now, there's going to be some variables in this. You know, obviously sandy soils are going to react a little differently in terms of P. But just keep that in mind when you're dealing with Bermuda grass, especially these newer hybrids. You probably want to keep your P levels down. Make sure you're getting a little bit of K down, and you know, stick to maintaining proper nitrogen rates. And I think that same philosophy and mindset can also apply to your other warm season grasses, your zoysia, your centipede, your St. Augustine. All right, y'all, so to wrap this up, the last thing I kind of wanted to touch base on are going to be the different utilizations of nutrients by the different turf grasses that we've covered today. You know, Bermuda is going to be our high-end user. It's going to consume the highest amount of nitrogen of any other turf grass species out there. The trick to managing Bermuda grass is managing the stem and sheath length, because if you can manage that, ultimately you're able to retain more color because you're retaining more leaf tissue every time you cut. So the way to do that is going to be frequent mowing, and Bermuda grass is one of those that if you want to mow it low, or according to the textbook, check back to that other video I did where I talked specifically about that. You know, Bermuda grass needs to be mowed, you know, on an every other day type cycle. However, if you're able to use growth regulators, if you're okay mowing it higher, you can back that down. But keep in mind, if you're mowing it higher, there may be at some point in the season you need to scalp it to manage that stem and sheath length, to make sure you're getting optimal color every time you cut. Zoysia grass is going to be a medium to low nitrogen user. These newer hybrid zoysias that are coming out are only requiring 2 to 3 pounds of N per year. I had one local guy tell me 1.5 pounds for his particular type of hybrid zoysia. In those instances, it's important to manage your micronutrient levels to make sure you're most efficiently utilizing the nitrogen you are applying. Also think about your nitrogen delivery method, utilizing urease inhibitors or denitrification inhibitors, or using carbon to more effectively deliver that nitrogen you're applying to mitigate the potential for loss. With Centipede and St. Augustine, they're going to be relatively low in users. Centipede only requiring 1 pound of N per year. Again, with Centipede, you're looking at it's going to be more management intensive on the disease and insect aspect of it. Low inputs from a fertility standpoint. It's going to be a high micronutrient user. It's also going to like a little bit of calcium and a lot of potassium. So keep that in mind. Also, Centipede loves acidic soil. Centipede is not something you need to be out there putting a bunch of lime on. You want that pH to be sub 5, sub 5.5. That's really where you're going to get its ultimate performance. Centipede is known as being the lazy man's grass. You don't have to mow it, but it does like to be mowed. If you mow it low and you mow it every week, it actually looks really nice and it gets really tight. I know that from when I had my own centipede yard. St. Augustine, you'll see some recommendations that are 6-8 pounds of nitrogen per year on St. Augustine. I read one when I was preparing for this video, and it said it was every 6 weeks fertilized with 1 pound of nitrogen, which is crazy because Centipede and St. Augustine are stoloniferous, and you're just not allowing those root systems to develop. So I highly recommend running lower rates, lower inputs on your St. Augustine, but maximizing your delivery method of those inputs. So that's really going to be a big one for utilizing your carbon-based fertility. Also with the St. Augustine, again, you're dealing with disease and insect management just as much as you are managing your fertility levels. St. Augustine's going to want to be mowed high. Zoysia grass. If you have the ability to reel mow zoysia grass, it will love you for it. If you don't, you're like the rest of the world, you're going to rotary mow it. However, again, just know that being rotary mowed, it's not going to perform the same way. It'll still perform great, it'll still perform good, but disease management, insect management are going to become more of a factor because you are rotary mowing it instead of reel mowing it, and probably not maintaining it at the heights where it tends to perform best. So anyway, y'all, that's going to be my warm season program video. I hope you learned something about it. I laid it out. I laid kind of the products I put out and gave you the seasons of peak growing, and wanted to instill in everyone's mind, again, plan for what's upcoming. That is what's going to set your program apart from everybody else. From that point, it's dialing in your specific fertility program to your specific soil types, and if you need help with that, always feel free to reach out to me. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for an amazing 2017. It blew my mind. I was able to take a nice break here at the end of the year, and I'm super excited for what's coming in 2018. And so that's why I started with this video tonight, coming out at midnight to celebrate the new year. And again, I can't thank you enough. In my personal business, again, I'm going to be going into grow mode this upcoming season, and I'm looking to hire someone else. And so as my 2018 early announcement to y'all, if you know anybody looking to get into the turfgrass industry, not concerned as much with experience as much as I am, finding someone who is a problem solver and who is not scared to put their mind and their physical being into a product and produce it out on the other end. If you know anyone looking to get into this type of career or work, let me know. I would love to talk to them and hopefully give them an opportunity that they would really enjoy. And again, I just cannot thank you all enough. It blows my mind each and every day I wake up and I think about where this has turned into, what this has turned into. I couldn't have done it without you, the other people on YouTube who've helped me out along the way. Biggest of thanks go to Pete with GCI Turf, Jacob with Scooter's Lawn Care, the Lawn Care Nut. It could go on and on and on and on forever and ever and ever. The number of people I owe so much to. Grass Daddy up north. I'm drawing a big blank because I'm talking to the camera, but I sincerely mean it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for everything y'all have done for me. It is just mind-blowing, and I'm super excited, super geared up, and motivated for what's coming in 2018. I hope all of you have the best and happiest of New Year's imaginable. Thank you again. Y'all have a good